All right. So let me briefly remind guys a little bit of information about you. You, of course, wrote the book Cricket in America, 1710 to 2000, which is what we'll talk about today. It was published in 2006. And you finished, I think, the follow-up, and we'll be publishing it at some point in the future, near future, hopefully.
Yeah.
Of course, you've been active with American college cricket since you came to the 2010 National Championship, when you said you had to come to see history in the making.
Yep.
We became pretty good friends.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, you've been such an important part of what we do, doing commentary in at least about half of our matches. We've broadcast over 120 matches. You've done commentary on at least half of those. And of course, outside of American college cricket, you've been actively involved with so much in cricket on the West Coast. And we, in fact, worked together in Compton with youth cricket there, was something you started going back over 25 years ago. And then American college cricket joined you in about 2014. Now, let's get to your book, because people need to know about this book. So you wrote it and you got it published in 2006, but obviously there were years spent writing it before. So let's start with what made you decide to write this book.
Well, I was in Hambledon with the LA Crickets, which is the homeless cricket team. And one of the guys on the sidelines came up and interviewed us. And then he wanted to come to LA and meet the LA Crickets. And turned out that he had written a book called Broadpenny Down, which was all about cricket in the 18th century in England. And so I got invited to the SCCA banquet, which you've been to, one or two of them. And he mentioned that there were a bunch of American cricketer magazines that had been totally untapped in terms of research. So when I was over in Philadelphia for the Philadelphia Cricket Festival about 2 years later, Sir Richard Hadley was there, pouring with rain. I went up to P.C. Morris Library and started reading these American cricketer magazines, which were 50 years of them. And I used that as the template for digging deeper. And I was surprised to see Lake County come up in California in around about 1890. And so I took a trip up to Lake County, which is one of the poorest places in California today. And there I found an archive with a librarian who was staying up waiting. I found, cricket in Growley, cricket, stagecoaches going up and down California, and cricket match, captains getting selected on the stagecoach to play the next game in Lake County, right on the Clear Lake there. So that was one instance. And there was another one when I came down to Sacramento, and I ran into a museum there, and the lady came out and said, "I hear you're doing cricket," and gave me a whole sheet of papers for the 1890s about these cricketers that were playing and had grown fruit in that local area. So all of a sudden, just by asking a few questions, I was getting, original information based off the template that came off of the American Cricketer magazine. And then, of course, I got in touch with the publisher, wrote a couple of chapters, and then the publisher said, "Well, you can't just do California. All I wanted to do was California." I figured that was enough. And they said, "No, you got to make it all about the United States." So I knew, obviously, that Philadelphia had a tremendous cricket tradition. And the challenge there was actually just too much information about how white Americans played cricket for over 50 years, way before baseball was established in Philadelphia. So I had to unravel that and dig a little bit deeper in that. And then I was able to get to know the personalities involved. The Newhall family had 11 Newhalls, and they straddled the Civil War. and they were American players that weren't allowed in by English players, English expat players back in the 1850s. So they set up their team called Young America, and they started beating the expatriates at their own game. And this was in the 1850s and all the way up through the Civil War. And then two of those guys fought on the Union side of the Civil War and took their cricket bats into battle with them, actually. So when they came back from the Civil War, they got cricket going again. And in the 1878, there was a Halifax Trophy in Canada, and they started for the Halifax Trophy in Philadelphia. So that was the Philadelphia connection. And then while I was there, the librarian at the C.C. Morris Library, who was very, very helpful, then sent me a bunch of stuff on Rajat Singh's travels in Chicago. Well, that was in 1899, so I started digging into that and found out that there was a huge amount of cricket going on in Chicago at the turn of the century. So it just kept on layering on and layering. In fact, I was wondering whether I'd ever be able to finish it. And what amused me was I run into Americans, saying I was writing a history of U.S. cricket, and they burst out laughing and said, well, that'll be 2 pages. And after spending about, 5 years in archives, I did 8 years of archival research, and also a lot of newspapers, a lot of microfiche. I went to the Lord's Museum, worked there with Stephen Green, who is a wonderful librarian and curator. And then I also went to the UCLA library, also up to Berkeley and so on. So I was in university libraries as well as cricket libraries, and I even went up to some mining libraries up in the Sierras as well. So I did a lot of travel. So 8 years later, I started writing it, and it really, David Sentance says that writing is we're constantly rewriting, and eventually, I'd get to a certain point and say, well, I don't know enough about this subject. And that happened to me in the case of Santa Monica. There'd been an earthquake here in California in 1906. So I said, well, there must be some records in Santa Monica. So I went into the newspaper, which had actually been there for about 60 years, and found out all these cricket photographs of guys playing again in the 1890s, right there in Santa Monica. So the research, once you dig into it, you just have to follow the trail and just have the stamina, frankly. It's like scoring a triple century. You really have to, I wish I had done, you really have to get stuck into the material and actually work it from the inside. And it will reveal, place itself out before you, but you have to dig deep enough to get to that point. And eventually I ended up with about, 360 pages, well documented. And that's the other thing, trained as a historian, both at UCLA and at Edinburgh University, it's always documenting your sources so that when somebody comes behind, it's like being a CPA, you have to leave all the calculations there if the IRS wants to come check what you're doing. A lot of guys like you today aren't leaving their sources, and they think, well, my stuff, this is my secret stuff, nobody's going to find out about it. Well, if it's going to be a proper history, it has to be peer reviewed. It also has to allow access to those to follow, and they may go into the documentation and see something you haven't found. So, in actual fact, the actual process of writing is very much an accretion. In other words, you have to leave behind the footsteps so that people can follow and build on what you've done or expand what you've done. And that's really where I felt this book was of use. The other thing, the reason I wrote it was because at the time, by around about 2000, when cricket was becoming South Asian in this country, in the United States, I knew that there would be a lot of new people coming in, not knowing that America had actually got a great tradition of cricket playing, and it had really helped baseball get going in the United States. I mean, in 1869, when they built the railroad, there was a team that came out from Cincinnati, the Cincinnati Red Stockings, and it was all cricketers. And one of the guys on that, set up the West Indian a cricket in Boston, and he sold cricket gear. And one guy who was watching him really carefully was Arthur Goodwill Spalding.
Before you get into Spalding, George Wright is the only man who's actually in the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And also, I'm not sure if it's the ICC Hall of Fame or what, but he's the only person who's also similarly recognized in cricket.
He really should be in the ICC Hall of Fame because he was probably the greatest athlete of the 19th century in America, because he introduced tennis in his area. There's argument about whether Overstreet did it in New York, but definitely he got it going. He got golf going, and he played professional baseball as well as played for the United States against England at cricket. He was
the only man to have that kind of record.
Yeah, absolutely. And then he also went on the 1874 tour that ended up at Lord's, and he was there on that team with Goodwill Spalding. And of course, Spalding copies that tour in 1889. And most baseballers, for instance, don't realize he's just copying a cricket adventure that he did 15 years before. They just see that as coming out of nowhere. Tabula rasa, America, tabula rasa. No, it was based on cricket, a cricket tour 15 years before, and he had all the contacts from that period. So cricket actually helped lay the template, not only for American governance. You know about John Adams, and just when America was deciding whether they wanted a president or a king, well, he came up with the president from the Boston Cricket Club. That also, it also laid the template for baseball. And a lot of people have made the mistake of thinking that the Civil War knocked out cricket. It didn't. Cricket actually expanded during the 1890s, but it became a kind of an aristocratic game, which it had been on the plantations in the 18th century, when a lot of American slave owners, frankly, were educated in England. They went to English law schools, then came back and learned the game in Essex and places like that, and played it, frankly, with slaves. That's what Newbook points out, on places like Middleton and along the Ashley River there in the Carolinas, and also in Virginia, and in fact, William Byrd, he established a dynasty, had over 200 slaves, and his relatives are still in Congress today. So that continuity of cricket is immense in American DNA.
Well, if the Civil War didn't damage it, as is widely believed, what made baseball go ahead?
Well, I think just to sidestep a little bit, of course, the tour that was going to come in 1862 to the United States then took off to Australia, and the Australians beat the English team. And of course, the rest is history as far as Australia and English cricket's concerned. But what really, I think really what happened with the baseball is that after the Civil War, there was more leisure time. America was industrializing very fast. The railways enabled the baseball teams to get around. And the one thing we sometimes forget is the Sabbath was taken very, very seriously. And actually, in fact, it's a bit of a novel idea, but baseball lent itself to a quick game on Sunday while the relatives couldn't know what was going on. And that was beginning to break down the restrictions on playing sport on Sunday in the United States, which is a pretty Christian country at that time. So, and that tied in with what was going in Harvard and various other secular institutions at that time. So I think baseball did a good job of breaking down barriers and utilizing the railways, utilizing everything it possibly could, as Arthur Goodwill Spalding has shown, utilizing cricket's experience of putting on tournaments and games. And then the key thing was that local industry got behind baseball and started sponsoring it and having their own teams. And they found that baseball was a quicker game to play than cricket at that time. And a lot of the literature, they're always referring to, baseball as being a quicker game than cricket. So America, it's always been about high wages and trying to keep the costs down. And baseball fit that ideal better than cricket did, because cricket at that time was a longer format. Now, I do know that today they're talking about the short format and so on. But remember, baseball won that battle well over 150 years ago. That's something that, this history should be read by a lot of the new administrators that are putting millions of dollars behind T20 format in the United States, because America had this decision, and even without a lot of money on the table, they preferred baseball. And if you think you can take on the baseball establishment with a 15-year, with a sport that's regarded as the 15th most important in the United States, you've got a challenge ahead of you, and you need to go into it with your eyes wide open. And I think the history shows how real smart businessmen, I mean, Goodwill Spalding, the first millionaire sports guy in sports gear, and he just copied George Wright to get there, but he took it to the next level. So these entrepreneurs that did a good job of getting baseball off the ground are now running these major franchises, and the major thing is that they're involved in their local, Los Angeles and all the country, all the cities around the country. That's not quite the case with cricket right now, because they just relied on leagues, and the teams are all somewhat ethnically based. So we've got to break that down if cricket's going to be as popular as baseball in the country, and if that is indeed the goal. And I think that's what the history shows as much as anything.
So of course, it was a lot of work to put together a book like that and put it out. 2006, it was published. Where can people get a hold of this book?
Thanks. Yeah, it's in most of the libraries. The one thing about going with a recognized publisher, their distribution is pretty good. So you can go on library.org and you can pick up a copy and read it in your local library. If you contact me on my website, which is on Facebook, I can send you an author's price copy, which is $30. And you might say, well, that's an expensive book. Well, the thing is that it's a limited production. A lot of sports books don't sell a lot, so the publishers have to price slightly higher to do that. But and you can also go to Amazon.com and just buy it directly as well. So it's still been selling consistently, and it's used a lot in research now. There's a lot of, I get probably 2 or 3 people contact me doing PhDs at various universities, asking questions about where they could dig. So I'm excited by the fact that there should be a lot more cricket information coming out about United States cricket based on these initiatives.
And of course, I believe you told me once that the book is in a lot of universities' libraries.
Yes, it's in Harvard and Yale and UCLA. It's all over the country, actually. It's up in urban Illinois, in Chicago, and quite a lot in Florida as well. New York Central Library has it, and so I think that was the main thing. This is kind of more of an academic cricket book, and so you needed to have it in the universities, for further research. And but I think the value is that there are a lot of photographs too of cricket, before 1921, which shows the vibrancy of the game in the United States, as America took to sport, frankly. And I mean, the other part of finishing your question is America was finding its own way after the War of Independence, and baseball, they were able to construe that as their game, just like America's literature also had to have its own authors, Hemingway and those people. As America, achieved its own identity as a country, and then, by 1908, when Theodore Roosevelt was president, now they've becoming they got a navy that battles the world, and so the power and the sport and the identity all tied together around about 1920. Especially after America became the richest country in the world following the First World War. And that actually, the First World War probably did more damage to cricket in the United States than any other war, because a lot of the Brits, expats that were playing that hadn't trained up kids in the school, they went back to England to fight in the trenches, and a lot of them were killed.
Yeah.
So it was very hard to get cricket reestablished after that.
Yeah. On that sad note, David, we'll wrap this up today.
Yep.
Because of course we could talk much longer on such a topic like this.
Yeah.
We will do other segments at other time. But thank you very much. Reminding people, the book is Cricket in America.
Yep.
1710 to 2000.
Yep.
By David Sentance. You can get it on Amazon. You can contact David directly through Facebook, LinkedIn, and of course, it's in libraries as well. So thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
We'll catch you.
Look forward to broadcasting with you soon again.
Yes. Take care.
Take care.